You're listening to Contesting Wrestling. Episode number, this one doesn't have a number. This one's gonna just come out at
It'll
a time.
probably have a number.
And then, it'll have a number because society's constraints are such that we must give it a number.
By the time it comes out, there might not be numbers anymore.
Yeah, we may be broadcasting this live to a race of super dolphins that have overthrown us.
Guys, society's going to change in a lot of ways when this is all done. If for some reason if this is the first episode you're listening to, this is a podcast in which I, Evan Burke, am somebody who traditionally I'm not a big wrestling fan. Never liked it. I was born in the 80s, and so I grew up at a time when wrestling was saturated in the culture, and didn't much care for it. However, 3 of my oldest and closest friends are not only massive wrestling fans and walking wrestling encyclopedias, but have to varying degrees dedicated their professional lives to wrestling. And so we are on a quest where they are trying to help me at least understand what the interesting things are about wrestling, what the value is of wrestling, why anybody would spend their time doing this.
Well, my name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been in pro wrestling for about 11 years or so. I really need to get a start date on it. And I do a little bit of everything. I do ring announcing commentary. I do wrestling. I do this podcast. To answer the question why people are into wrestling and spend a lot of their time in it, well, I think a lot of us in wrestling would like an answer to that question, too. So we're digging right on in.
Oh, I got really excited like you finally had an answer, and I was going to be like, podcast's over. We're done.
Boy.
Cool. All right.
I know where our bread's buttered, brother. Yeah.
I am Katie Vella. I am a professional wrestling referee mainly. I have been watching wrestling since 2003. Been in the wrestling business since 2014. You can follow me at Ref Katie on Twitter. And believe it or not, guys, Evan is not kidding. He does not like wrestling. It gives him convulsions.
She's seen it.
I am Dr. Ben Abelson. I am a professor of philosophy at Mercy College, and I have been well immersed in pro wrestling media for the majority of my life, to the point where if I went without it for a while, I might get convulsions. Who knows?
Well, it's a good thing we're still doing this podcast then. And it's a good thing there's a nearly infinite amount of back wrestling to
yes,
watch.
because as we are going to be discussing today, the current wrestling product that does not have a live audience leaves something to be desired.
It does, yes.
It's certainly very interesting.
We are recording this on April 13th. It's a Monday. It's going to come out. This is probably going to come out somewhere in the middle of our Foley series. It'll be a little stopgap in there or something. We're recording this at a time Wrestlemania just happened, and it was filmed with no audience because we are in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis.
Yes, WrestleMania 36. It was about a week ago. It was broadcast over 2 nights, Saturday and Sunday, April 4th and 5th. The matches for the first time ever were taped in advance. They weren't shown live. The majority of it was filmed in the WWE Performance Center with no audience. But some of the matches, and 2 of the ones we're going to talk about today, were filmed on some location or on a set or somewhere other than the traditional wrestling arena.
In one case, potentially outside the time-space continuum.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was going to say at least one did seem to take place inside of a dimension of Bray Wyatt's own construction.
Yes, and we're going to talk a whole lot about that. That was my favorite of the 3 things we're talking about today.
Oh, that was my favorite thing that the WWE has ever made.
It's one of mine as well. It's really close to my favorite
Same,
thing.
Surprised
yeah.
how many people are saying that exactly within and without wrestling. Like, oh, wrestling can do this? It's like, yeah, and the WWE has the budget to do it, too. They're really the only ones that could potentially bring it to us at the highest quality.
Let me tell you, so the match we're talking about, by the way, is from night 2. It's the Firefly Funhouse match. Firefly Funhouse match between John Cena and Bray Wyatt. I wanted to share what religious scholar, writer, and big pro wrestling fan Michael Muhammad Knight had to say about this on his Facebook, because I thought he put it really well. He said, seriously, wrestling just deconstructed itself and there's no putting it back together. WWE had a match in which John Cena was transported into another dimension, forced to confront the darkest recesses of his own psyche, exposed as an illusion and empty promise of a hero that cannot exist, and ultimately defeated by a supernatural demon who occupies the body of a wrestler that Cena defeated 6 years ago. It was unprecedented and world-shattering, and yet somehow represents everything that I love about wrestling. How can I even sleep tonight? He posted that the night of Mania.
And for some reason, WCW Nitro was there.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. And the SmackDown fist. And I don't know, are we going to lead with Firefly then? Because I'm down. Let's just go for
Same.
it.
I would like to lead. I have the most to say about the other cinematic match.
Okay.
The Boneyard
And
match.
chronologically,
Okay.
that was
Yes.
first. That was the main event of night one. So let me
Yes.
just, okay, go ahead, Evan. So this is the Boneyard match between AJ Styles and The Undertaker, which was filmed in a cemetery. It was the main event from night one of WrestleMania. Evan, what did you think of the Boneyard match?
Okay. A lot of things. First, the overarching issue that I thought came up here was that whether, and this is a lesson that they did seem to learn for the Wyatt Cena match that they did not learn here, which is that whether they like it or not, they might have thought of this match as wrestling. Like, oh, this is going to be a wrestling match. It's going to happen as part of WrestleMania. We're going to film something that, obviously it's different from what normally happens, but it's basically wrestling. And the problem is that they are now making like a film. Like they're now making a movie or TV or whatever you want to call it, but they are making something cinematic whether they like it or not. And that's just going to have different rules, not because of I'm not like a fucking, film school like theory nerd or anything, like not in that sense, not even like a taste thing, but just like the way that you communicate a story over film is different from the way that you communicate a story in a wrestling match, and there's a lot less overlap than you would think. And so I think my core issue with it was how the story was told.
So before you give us your judgment on that, I just want to say that this is exactly what Jim Cornette said about it, pretty much.
Oh, really?
Oh boy.
And he said, and I think it's funny with Jim Cornette because like I tend to agree with him, but think that he doesn't have to be such a dick about it. And in this case,
I could see that in a lot of cases. He's not a dumb guy.
he liked the Boneyard match. And he said, look, but it wasn't wrestling. It was a movie starring AJ Styles and The Undertaker. And AJ Styles and The Undertaker happen to be decent enough actors that they can put on this movie fight scene, which is basically what it was. And Jim Cornette was worried that if other wrestlers who don't have such good acting chops tried to do the same thing, and they're inevitably going to, it's going to be awful, as already evidenced by the absolutely just atrocious match between Tommaso Ciampa and Johnny Gargano that they did on NXT. And so
Was it bad? I haven't
thought
seen
it was
yet.
just
Haven't seen it yet,
horrible.
yeah. It got a lot of flack. I did hear that. And usually they're critical darling matches.
Right. I mean, but it exposed that being a wrestler doesn't mean really being an actor. It's a very different skill. Now, I'm sure Evan is going to disagree with us about the extent to which AJ and Undertaker actually did pull off this cinematic fight scene. I thought it was pretty good. I didn't think it was like an amazing piece of art, but I thought they did the absolute best for what they could here.
Well, I thought that so I thought that the content of the match they had, like the things they did and said to each other over the course of this period of time, I thought that was cool and well done and like seemed like it would be a good wrestling match. I thought it was shot horribly. Like the video quality was somewhere between high school horror movie that is like shot on a cell phone, and like reality TV. Kind of like there was one shot where an Undertaker was lying there like against the trees, where it looked like a shot from Survivor, kind of, because like the palms in the background.
Did you hear a bunch of like random noise and people talking on set and stuff like that during it?
Oh no!
No, I
It
didn't
seemed
notice it
just
at all.
produced really
didn't
badly.
really notice
Actually,
it.
I think you're
The
right.
editing-
About this.
Well, it was definitely produced like post quarantine with skeleton
Right.
crew. That's the other
Yes,
thing.
it probably didn't have the entire crew that it needed to come off like
Sure.
super like high level professional.
Which, if it wasn't the fucking WWE's, flagship event, I wouldn't be so nitpicky
Oh, yeah.
about it. But like,
Oh no, pick those nits. Pick those nits.
like I could, like the editing, it was just one of those things where like they were editing the cuts lasted. It was like every 1 second, every like under 1 second to just under 2 seconds. Just like the constant, like, and a lot of modern action movies are edited that way, but this did not have, I don't know, man, it just really didn't work. And I would also say, man, like, they are not good actors. They are good at like in-ring like stuff, like they're good at saying things to each other. There's like AJ Styles gives a monologue that, because here's the AJ Styles has a lot of almost charisma, right? AJ Styles
Yeah.
is charisma
Yeah.
adjacent. There is a scale of dudes like AJ Styles that goes from Chip Gaines on the good end to Kid Rock on the bad end. And
Kid Rock is a source of evil.
he's under Billy Ray Cyrus. Like he's between Billy Ray Cyrus and Kid Rock. He gives this monologue at one point that he like does not have the dramatic chops to pull off. He gives a really funny look when the Undertaker teleports behind him.
Which is by far the best part of the match, I think.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think like the Undertaker, like once again, he's good at like delivering the lines
yeah.
in the way that works in a wrestling match, but once again it doesn't have like the juice behind it that you need for act. It's like, it's hard to describe, and it really got me thinking about where is the line between, like, because I am really intrigued by the idea of dialogue in wrestling matches. I think that's really cool. I think that's something that's wildly underexplored, but at the same time, like, you don't want it to be too scripted. But if you are telling a cinematic story, like, is that wrestling promo improv kind of banter and stuff, is that going to cut it? And I don't know if this works
I think
for
it's
me.
especially the case when you're dealing with the matches that are in the arena, where they're talking to each other a lot more, and having a lot of dialogue. And most of that fell flat for me. I mean, because they're not actors. They're not trained to perform these lines in that way. It is really interesting, right? Because it's a really subtle difference between what they do in the ring when they'll say something that's supposed to get a reaction from the audience, as opposed to saying something that's supposed to stand on its own.
Yeah. Well, there's a big
'Cause
difference
in the-
between doing live theater and doing recorded acting. I think that's really the thing that we could compare it the most to. If you do live theater, you have to be cognizant of just the people in front of you. If there are no people in front of you, the people watching are coming from a completely different place.
And I'm going to go back to one of my essential theses about wrestling here, which is that without an audience, there's nobody to lie to.
Right. No, that's absolutely right.
Because they're not acting,
Yeah.
they're lying.
Essential feces? What are you into, Evan?
There's no one to me, it's not just there's no one to lie to, there's no one to manipulate.
Yeah.
Right.
And wrestling is the art of manipulating the audience. Painting is the art of manipulating paint. Music is the art of manipulating sound. What wrestlers work on, the material that they work on, is the audience. And when that's missing, they're not doing anything.
We didn't cover these matches. We didn't have Evan watch these matches, but the two matches I felt suffered the most from not having an audience were, one, the last man standing match. And
I like that one. Yeah.
It went on like 10 minutes too long. The last man standing match and Drew versus Brock.
Yeah, Drew versus Brock needed the big pop at the end when Drew won the title.
Can you imagine like how the crowd would have reacted after Drew kicked out of the third
heavy
F5?
I mean, that was the whole point of the match.
And I really liked the way
Yeah.
Drew, held his hand out to the camera and was like, "You're all with me." I thought it was a nice touch, and I thought he pulled it off well.
Yeah, I was really into that too.
But that wouldn't have been but that's not as good as him standing in front of 70,000 people having slayed the beast.
But it couldn't happen, and I understand it couldn't happen, but he really deserved a crowd for that moment.
I want to make a point about AJ Styles in something like this. Like, Evan, you pointed out, like, completely rightfully so, he's not the guy to do these long monologues. He has gotten better over the years at doing stuff like this, not to the point where he's, like, really good. And this is to, like, you observed about how he's almost charismatic. He's such an excellent, like, in-ring performer. He knows how to control his body. He knows when to turn it up and turn it down. He knows how to play with a wrestling crowd. A lot of the guys that came up with him, he hit big later than them because of that specifically. Within wrestling, and it's the same thing within any other art form, really, the most technically sound people are not the most popular and are not actually the ones that the crowds are going to like. Like, he came up with, like, CM Punk, and Punk became a huge star, crashed, and retired before the WWE even finally considered signing AJ Styles.
And one problem with Punk was that his technique wasn't quite up to par with his mind and with his character.
Punk could put on some very good matches, but technically speaking, like, he wasn't the smoothest wrestler.
It's a shame because I do think, like, I mean, he seems like a smart guy, a capable performer. If you gave the guy an acting coach, something like that, like, worked on this kind of stuff, like, because that's the other thing is that this seemed like, I mean, it's a shame also because at the end of this match, he died. And, like, he, like, for real died. Yeah, so AJ Styles is dead now.
Yeah, he is.
And I think Luke Gallows died, too. The Undertaker threw him off the roof.
AJ had the one hand sticking up
right.
at the end. So it's possible he's still alive.
Yeah, Luke Gallows is definitely dead, though.
Yeah, Luke Gallows is definitely dead. If I could compare it more to, like, Kung Fu movies, I did like when, like, the 9 Druids came out and then the Undertaker had to fight them all off. That was pretty cool.
I just still don't understand why the Druids went heel.
No health insurance.
That's as good of a guess as any.
I remember when we started the podcast in the early episodes, I would talk a lot about martial arts movies because that was kind of my frame of reference for, like, I don't know, filmed violence, I guess, or staged or choreographed violence.
It's not a bad point of reference.
This really made me kind of I wish that they had taken some lessons from martial arts movies because I think, part of why people really part of why people really like martial arts movies specifically, more so even than regular action movies, is because you're watching, these physically skilled people do something that's kind of hard to fake. And the best martial arts movies are shot in such a way, the fights are shot in such a way where you're really just watching people do the cool things they're good at. Before this podcast started, before we started recording, we were talking about the Matrix movies, and because we're getting nostalgic and we're all getting old. Yeah. And it just seemed to me like there was a real wasted opportunity here because it's like shot in this shitty jerky cam, edited like in such a way as to make you think something exciting is happening because that's why this must be cutting every fucking 0.8 seconds. But the thing is, these guys are really good at doing one long thing in one without having to do multiple takes and do it in one shot. So it seems really a shame to, like, I'm not saying that the whole thing should have been like a, David Fincher one shot or something like that, but it would have been really cool to have just like long stretches of them doing the stuff that they're good at,
So, well, on that point, like, I think what made it work was they didn't try to make it a wrestling match. There's very few wrestling moves at all. Like, the Undertaker does one tombstone and then the choke slam to AJ off the roof. And yes, we want to see these guys do what they're good at. That's not what the point of this film was. This was to do something that might be visually interesting, given that having them just do what they were good at wasn't going to work without an audience. And so what Jim Cornette said about it, which I think is right, is like, look, and this is to your point, Evan, one of the great things about wrestling about wrestling and about wrestlers, like people say, oh, they're like stuntmen. And it's like, yeah, they're like stuntmen, but they do the stunts in one take
exactly.
in front of a live audience. And so once you have this cinematic wrestling where you're doing multiple takes, it takes away a lot of what is special about wrestling, that they're performing all this stuff in front of a live crowd. So then when you get to something like Ciampa and Gargano, where they just basically had a wrestling match that they filmed like a movie, it was fucking horrible. It's like, why do I want to see this?
That does sound like that's maybe not great. What's the thing? It does feel like if this is going to be something that happens more in wrestling, not even necessarily because of, coronavirus, but just because it's a thing that, that they've started doing that could really work, I feel like, there's probably going to be a generation of wrestlers that comes up that's a lot better at the acting side of things, or at least can also do that in addition. But it's also, they're going to need to find the way to make it work, because it does seem like it should be able to work.
It has worked. I mean, I think the Firefly Funhouse, and that was just acting, right? Like,
yes. Well, we'll get to that, but that worked. That worked, but there were a lot of very fundamentally different things.
It's very different. Very different. Well, I think if they want to make it work, they have to start experimenting with it. And they're not going to be able to find out how something like this works until they just start doing it a bunch and figure it out. Some things will work better than others. Yeah.
There are some other examples. I think we'll watch eventually Orange Cassidy and Stokely Hathaway, the thing that they did. There are the Ultimate Deletion matches. Maybe we should watch one of those in the premium for this.
The whole broken Matt Hardy thing is an interesting story.
The influence on Matt Hardy on this whole landscape right now is really interesting.
Right, we could go on about that. That's not really the topic of what we're talking about, but you're right. Matt Hardy in his mind has been doing stuff like this for a while. Lucha Underground, this is has been doing cinematic style things for a long time, and they seem to know what they were doing a lot better than this.
Their matches weren't cinematic, though.
Right.
They had a lot of cinematic stuff around the matches, which I fucking love.
The matches were like a little cinematic sometimes, just enough.
The camera angles were a little different.
Right. It was very edited.
I just want to say,
You sound like half the music I listened to as a teenager.
Okay. So, and to your other point, Evan, about how this wasn't done as well, like it was sort of a missed opportunity. It really was done at the last minute.
Yes.
On a skeleton crew. A lot of the stuff that they did was ad-libbed. When Undertaker puts his arm through the window of the hearse, he claims that wasn't planned. I think he just wanted to put the metal spike through the window. And his arm went all the way through and got all cut up. He claims that wasn't planned.
See, I thought it was a direct callback to when Goldberg put his arm through a windshield in WCW.
Which was also not planned.
Yes, that was not planned either.
I want to say, that's cool that they put it together at the last minute. And I understand that, given those constraints, there's going to be some flaws and stuff. I just feel like it felt like they did not hire somebody who knew how to operate a camera or edit a compelling sequence. And what bothered me about that is that the WWE is worth hundreds of millions of dollars and is located vaguely in the New York City metropolitan area, where I personally know at least 9 out-of-work video editors, all of whom would have done it for minimum wage.
Well, they probably got their usual guys to do it who were used to editing wrestling matches.
Yeah. And for wrestling, they have and have always had by far the best production.
Yes.
Their production is seamless for wrestling.
Right. But that's a whole different story than what they're trying to do here. So before we get to the Firefly Funhouse match,
there's 2 more things I wanted to say about Boneyard. But were you going to say more about?
No,
Boneyard?
I'm pretty done with Boneyard. I thought it was very entertaining. I everything that has been critiqued about it in this is also quite valid. I think that it hid the Undertaker's weaknesses well, being such an old and broken man, but it also shined a spotlight on AJ Styles' weaknesses, because his strengths are the meat and potatoes of all of this, and this wasn't either of those.
Yeah, weird to pick him. I agree. Honestly, it did seem... I mean, I guess there was a whole story going before then.
That was just the match that was booked for Mania.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was already something that was planned to happen.
This would have been a lot better if wrestling wizard AJ Styles could dance around rather
Sure.
broken Mark Calloway, who still knew very well how to be the Undertaker in front of 70,000 people, but that's not how it worked out.
The reason why they booked this match apparently is after the disastrous Undertaker Goldberg match.
Ugh.
Kurt Angle went up to The Undertaker and was like, hey, I bet you could get a really good match with AJ Styles.
Right, Kurt Angle and AJ Styles had a bunch of incredible matches in TNA, and then Kurt Angle was like, hey, this guy AJ Styles, to which, the corporate wrestling world was like, man, he's short, though. It's Southern, and we don't like either of those things.
If they were trying to make a really good movie, they probably would have done Undertaker and Bray Wyatt or something like that.
Right.
But yeah, so a couple of things. One thing on the story and one thing on the performance. So on the performance, and I mentioned this in the minisode before, but I want to mention it again now, that Undertaker, the best part of the match for me is when Undertaker was selling. And we've never really seen Undertaker sell before. And he looks like a dying old man when he's selling.
He really does.
It really comes off as legitimate. And I thought it was especially during this time when a lot of our elderly loved ones are dying from the coronavirus and shit like that.
Yeah.
I thought watching that, that weekend while this is all happening, that sort of resonated with me more so than it might some other time. And so there's that. And along with that, so the story of the match has to do with like AJ calling out The Undertaker, saying he's over the hill, calling out his wife, Michelle McCool.
Calling him by name.
Right, calling him Mark
Actually, yes.
Calloway, and calling out Michelle McCool. I guess because AJ is still pissed that she used the Styles Clash 10 years ago.
Right. When the Undertaker's wife was wrestling, she was just using AJ's finishing move because AJ wasn't in the WWE, so she wasn't using it there. And it was a cool looking move, so she just used it. And that's how that works.
So yeah, he calls him Mark Calloway. At one point, I don't know if you heard, in the Boneyard match, Undertaker calls him Alan. He's like, hey, Alan.
I heard that.
That's what the A in AJ stands for. Alan Jones, one of the more common names you could possibly have in America.
And also Alan, very unthreatening as names go.
Totally.
Very unthreatening.
So,
the tattoos on AJ's body, as a little side note, he has like AJ on there. And part of that was I think he knew he was going to try and angle for a job with the WWE and didn't want them to give him like a different name that he had already branded his whole career after.
That's smart.
And then the birth dates of his 4 children below it.
Unrelated side note. Do you know AJ Styles was featured in a piece of political speculative fiction in Jacobin magazine a while back?
Really?
no, I didn't know that.
That was about like the dark and corrupt election of 2060, in which AJ Styles is running for president after gaining popularity for performing the Styles Clash on another senator.
This is an actual thing?
This is a thing that was published in like a relatively popular political magazine.
Yeah, I know Jacobin.
that's
Yeah, that's amazing. I have to read that.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly, but if you Googled AJ Styles Jacobin, I'm pretty sure that it'll be in the first couple responses. As you were saying,
the last thing I wanted to say about this match is the story of the match. AJ calls out Undertaker. He calls him Mark Calloway. Historically, Undertaker has played 2 different characters. He did the like full-on zombie Undertaker. Then in the late 90s, he got rid of all the supernatural stuff and was just a biker, the American badass, as people call him. Then he brought back the zombie thing and sort of with a little bit still of the American badass. It was like less completely cartoonish.
a theme song performed by Kid Rock, who who partially defines the scale upon which AJ Styles falls as a human.
And then
he used that song for a little while as a theme, then switched to Rollin' by Limp Bizkit, and then they got their own people to make a song.
Continue rolling.
So, in interviews recently, Undertaker has referred to the character that he's playing in the Boneyard match as the Holy Trinity, as a combination of the zombie, the American Badass, and just himself, Mark Calloway.
It felt a bit like a career retrospective of a character, kind of.
It was
'cause-
supposed to be,
yeah,
for sure.
Because I imagine he's not going to be doing this for much longer, right? Like,
Well, he actually said,
We'll see.
he was like, in creating this new version of the character, I was worried that I might not have that many more matches. And I like spent all this time and effort putting together this new version. So he's hoping
He knows it's coming. Yeah. He knows it's coming sooner than later. So before we get full on into the Firefly Funhouse, we did watch one match that happened in the empty arena, right?
Yeah.
We watched Charlotte and Rhea Ripley.
Charlotte Flair versus Rhea Ripley for the NXT Women's title. It was the first match on night 2.
Yeah. Now I thought that this was the best like wrestling match in the ring of the weekend.
I agree. I think most people agree about that.
Well, the women have been blowing the men out of the water for a while in the WWE now, and Charlotte has really led the charge. I noted when we briefly touched upon this in the mini episode beforehand that Charlotte did not look like she was posing for an empty crowd. She looked like she was posing for herself because her glory has to be witnessed by somebody, even if it's just herself and the camera. She wrestled like she wanted to win the match. She showed up to win that title, and
They
she
both
did.
They
both
were
did.
wrestling like they were there to win the match.
Right,
And
not to get over with the crowd. And I
Yeah.
think
I don't want to discount Rhea Ripley. I thought Rhea did fantastic. I thought that the gigantic backlash you saw in like the wrestling community of Charlotte winning the title was just indicative of her being a heel.
Same, yes.
Yeah, it worked very well. I'm a big fan of it. I'm there for it. If you want the NXT title to be seen as the best title in wrestling, if you want it to be seen as the best women's title in the WWE, you put the top wrestler with that belt, and they have done so.
Yeah, and I think even though I thought it was the best match in front of the empty arena, I still don't think it was good. Like, I think it's still the bad match. I think Charlotte did an amazing job wrestling an engaging match without the crowd there. Rhea did okay. But she's not really the experienced wrestler. And I think it really showed how much Charlotte carried that match. And Rhea Ripley she's good. I think, she has a lot of potential. She's not in the place to be beating Charlotte Flair at WrestleMania, whether it's for the NXT Women's title or any other title. But yeah, I'm interested to hear, Evan, what did you think of this match with no crowd?
So this is the first audience-free wrestling I've watched.
Before you continue, I think this is also cool since we just watched all these Charlotte matches in front of an audience, so you have a really good contrast.
Yeah.
Totally. This is the first audience-free wrestling I've watched. This is when I remember, all throughout the whole time we've been doing this, I always just sort of ignored the audience or thought I was ignoring the audience and thought I was blocking them out.
You're never really ignoring the
Exactly,
audience.
that's the
Feeling
thing.
them subconsciously, yeah.
You guys were always chastising me to make sure that I was consciously paying attention to them. I never really realized how important they were until now, because I felt like I watched a really solid rehearsal.
Exactly, yeah.
And
Right.
it just feels all of the inherent sort of ridiculous tensions in wrestling about like where it is between being fake and being real and all that stuff just feels very silly with nobody there to watch. Like, I was watching it and I was like, this is ridiculous, but not in a good way.
I agree. I liken it. I've talked about how wrestling without an audience is like music without the sound, just like watching people, like watching someone's fingers on the guitar. But I was thinking a more apt analogy might be it's like music without the bass. Like you don't really notice the bass consciously, but when it's not there, it's just that you can't feel the music.
You're like, what even is happening right now? I think that's a good analogy because they were both good. Also, you notice when the vocals suck a lot more when there's no bass, because I kept writing down. I was like, is there normally this much screaming in wrestling? Like, I get that they're screaming at each other and they're like, it's good that they're pretending to fight.
They were doing it more to cover for the lack of audience, and I think
to fill the sound space.
And I think they did it better than most other people. Most of the other matches where there was like dialogue in the middle of the match, it was like really stiff.
It was very clear that the roster as a whole was instructed to be more vocal, and they all took that in different ways and took it in different directions.
Yeah, Charlotte and Rhea sounded more like the kind of vocals you'd make when you're fighting, just like kias and stuff, more than like them talking to each other the whole time.
Or possibly a hardcore porn, whichever.
One of those.
For me, the issue wasn't even so much that they were like yelling and screaming and acting like they were fighting each other, like, and I thought that they were doing it very convincingly, really well. It's just that it turns out I don't want to hear that. Like that's like it's just, I just learned that that's a shitty thing to listen to for 20 minutes when you're used to hearing sort of the highlights of that and an audience and the commentator. I never thought I'd miss the commentator. I mean, I guess the commentators are there, but yeah,
they are there. Like, no, they're much worse without the audience.
Yeah, so much worse.
When they're the only thing that you're hearing, like, that's a real problem.
Listen to this crowd. Oh, no, sorry. You know.
Again, on the contrast between Charlotte and Rhea, I found like I was more engaged with the match when Charlotte was on offense. Whenever Rhea, and I don't think this is necessarily Rhea's fault, but it's just part of what a babyface is. Like, the babyface responds to the crowd and is pushed on by the crowd. When that's not there, it's like the fire just isn't the same.
Right, the heel is acting in their own interest.
When there is a crowd, the underdog is the person with less of a chance that you're kind of rooting for. And when there's no crowd, the underdog is just like the person that's not as good at wrestling.
Yeah, exactly. That's
that's a very good way of putting that, Evan.
And you're like, watching this and you're just like, well, why should I want her to win? I don't care. But Charlotte's clearly better at this, and I feel no investment as to who I should or should not be rooting for, you know?
Yeah, you can't turn to the person next to you and be like, wouldn't it be great if this upstart beat Charlotte? Like, that'd be something. It's like, there's none of that. It's just Charlotte beating the less experienced wrestler.
Charlotte did have one really great moment of selling in there.
Yeah.
At one point she's selling and she kind of realizes she's more hurt than she thought she would be. She's like, and I thought that really put over Rhea pretty well. But I thought the best part of the match was Charlotte working that damn leg and trying to get to the figure eight, and then finally she does and Rhea taps. So that kind of story in wrestling is easy to tell. It gets across to the audience really well. And that's the kind of thing that I think works better in this kind of in this context.
I was glad that they did not try to do anything that was more like acting like, because I can't like Charlotte especially, she's gotten so much better in all of the ways that in all of the things she does over the last 6 years. But like I still feel like I wouldn't want her to like read a scripted monologue or anything.
And especially not Rhea, who her promos are really not that good yet. Her character isn't really put together. Like, you even got less of a sense of it here. I guess because they wanted her to be the clear babyface, they put her in blue and white. Whereas normally on NXT, she's like full black leather, like metal decked out, which like works with her theme music and stuff like that.
I will interject that I think that may have been a decision from Rhea Ripley, and this may be because I am younger than her and therefore closer to her age, even though she's significantly younger than me. That was definitely just her dressing up as Vegeta in Super Saiyan, Saiyan inspired gear. She was straight up in like a gear version of like Saiyan armor. It looked almost exactly like
they had Dragon Ball when I was a kid.
Yeah,
like that's a thing. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but
I've watched
was aware
so
of
much
it.
Dragon Ball Z over and over. She was definitely, that was straight up her themed gear. She was probably going to wear it regardless of if there was a crowd or not, or what they wanted her to portray.
I mean, I think it's kind of a problem with her where she looks super metal and like she has the physique for it. But then when she gets on the mic, she doesn't sound aggressive or threatening at all.
Yeah. Well, she's very good for her experience level, but she's not the number one superstar that like I think a few people really want her to be already. Give her a few more years, and she may very well be. She has a super lot of promise
Yeah, when I first saw her in the Mae Young Classic 2 years ago, before she even had the metal trappings, it was just like, damn, this woman is tall and athletic and strong looking, and, she's going to kill for them eventually if they figure out how to
She was only like 21 at the time, too, at the Mae Young.
Was this is unrelated, was this a, pirate-themed WrestleMania?
Yeah, they were supposed to have a huge stadium-sized, set with a pirate ship and flag and everything. And
because it's in Tampa Bay.
Right, because it's in Tampa Bay. They had an intro each night that was kind of a faux Pirates of the Caribbean kind of thing that would have fit a lot better if they could cut to 70,000 screaming fans afterwards.
Yeah.
But, instead it's they had the logo. So they put the logo up, and what can you do past that?
We already made all these graphics.
Right, we already made all these graphics. We might as well show them to people. Everybody understands there's going to be a bit of a disconnect here.
One other last thing about Rhea that I think is really good. She has, for her lack of experience, has really good instincts in the ring.
Yeah.
I remember in the second Mae Young Classic, she wrestled Casey Catanzaro, the American Ninja Warrior.
Right. She's
winner,
a crazy gymnast.
Former American Ninja Warrior. Yeah, and she's awesome. She does a lot of cool things, but this was her first ever, televised wrestling match. And there was a point in the match where she was going to completely botch something, and Rhea saved it in a very clever way. One should go back. And maybe we might watch that match again. It was a really interesting match between the two of them. Casey brings a unique flavor to pro wrestling.
She's really tiny.
She's very, very tiny, yes.
Yeah.
I just want to say before we move on, I mentioned this in the mini-sode we recorded today, but since we recorded the Charlotte episodes, I have been to Charlotte Flair's Wikipedia page and learned that she has fought a cop. So, respect.
Yeah, you don't mess with Charlotte no matter what your uniform is.
She's a throwback to both NWAs.
Yes.
I'm not going to touch that one.
Also learned that she posed nude for ESPN magazine, which I didn't think that was a sentence.
Oh yeah, the shape issue or the body issue.
Oh, okay, yeah. I guess they have an issue where they do that. I was like, I didn't realize that happened.
Right, lots of athletes pose nude for that. They're tasteful shots where you don't see anything that you wouldn't like, but they're great. It's if your big thing's your body, a lot of people want to show them
100%.
that.
All right, let us enter the dimension of the Firefly.
And what a dimension it is.
As John Cena did.
On a basic level, it worked. I mean, it worked. And here's why it worked. And some of these are concrete facts and some of these are guesses on my part.
I think we prepared you very well for it with this podcast, actually.
Yes, very much so. There was a lot of context.
And if you were unprepared, you definitely wouldn't have gotten it. I have one friend, Paul, a fellow philosopher, who was watching on a VChat with a bunch of people who aren't wrestling fans, and they did not get it at all. Okay, Evan.
Even with the knowledge that I have, I still was lost for a chunk of it, but just knowing what the general thrust of it was really helped. First, just on a basic level, these two guys can act.
They can, yes, both of them.
Yeah. Cena's been training as an actor for a couple of years, and Wyatt, as we know, his big, stock in trade is basically playing that character as hard as possible, wherever that character has taken him over the years.
For all that I have shat on The Fiend, and I still think a lot of his matches that I've seen are terrible, but The Fiend as a character makes a lot more sense to me in the greater Bray Wyatt context.
It worked especially here where he just showed up at the end to kill Cena in 1 second.
Yeah.
I think you even mentioned that one of the previous times we talked about The Fiend, where if he's going to be a horror movie monster, just have him show up when it's time to kill someone.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of having to wrestle a whole match.
This was a perfect amount
Evan,
of Fiend.
talk.
Oh, no, it's a perfect amount of Fiend stuff. It worked because they can act. Cena especially, John Cena is a really talented comedic actor, man. I gotta say, I haven't
And not just comedic. The part where he's playing Thugonomics Cena, but he's not just playing Thugonomics Cena. He's playing guy who's the caricature of Thugonomics Cena that you can tell is distasteful, or that's knows it's distasteful in a certain way.
Right.
Yes. modern Cena trapped in his past self that he is ashamed of now.
Right, there you go. That's a good way to put it.
Standing in front of the SmackDown fist in those tiny, tiny trunks.
Pretty wild.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to take a guess that, I don't know if you have any insider information about this, but I'm going to take a guess that Bray Wyatt had a lot more to do with the construction of this segment than wrestlers normally have to do with the construction of certain segments.
Reportedly, 3 people put this together. Bray Wyatt, John Cena, and Bruce Pritchard.
I could see all that.
Yeah, same.
As the Boneyard match had Jeremy Borash written all over it, this definitely had like Pritchard, who's into horror stuff. Yeah.
It's a shame that we are fated to defeat Bruce Pritchard one day, at least in podcast form.
One day.
Because it's...
We got to show you him as his character in WWF, Brother Love, the televangelist.
Yeah. That was cool. You know, he never was a very consequential character. He was like a heel that did interviews, and he'd interject a little bit here and there, but it was like context being like 1989, 1990. It was a big send-off of the televangelist on television at the time, which he loved to watch and laugh at. Yeah.
Actually, you have seen him once. He was Undertaker's manager for his very first appearance at Survivor Series 90.
I feel like the lesson here isn't even like, oh, the WWE should do more, weird out there stuff or should do more meta stuff like this or anything. But it's really just that they should let their talent have the space to make cool things.
They should, absolutely. Yes. It's a big problem, actually.
That's the thing. Like it always seems like when they have somebody who's really good and they let them just step out and kind of take a little more creative control over at least their own character and their own storyline, it seems like it's always better because it's just like the best that the booking and the writing and the top brass can do in the WWE. It's a pretty low bar.
They have hired a bunch of wrestlers to be wrestlers, of course. And they've hired a bunch of Hollywood writers, Hollywood-style writers, to write dialogue for them that they're supposed to say to each other to create drama. But as we've established in this episode, those are two related but different skill sets. You don't necessarily know how to deliver a line. Some people know instinctively how to deliver a line, like The Rock did, for example. He could always, but even The Rock, if you watch his stuff later on, he got a lot better at it because he just developed that skill, even before he started taking acting lessons. But when you have wrestlers, when you have wrestling being written by wrestlers or being written by bookers, not Hollywood writers, you take the writing process out of the hands of the office and put the performance back in the hands of the actual performers that have characters in their heads and just let them be at each other. And it's always better that way.
Yeah, like when you're a writer, you write characters and you're supposed to know, like, even if you don't talk about it, like, you're supposed to know, where they have Thanksgiving, or like,
yeah, right.
what they read when they're taking a shit or whatever, right? Like all these little details that you might not actually talk about, but you should know the character that deeply. And in wrestling, that's the job of the individual wrestler, to live their character. And so no one's going to know the character better than the wrestler themselves. The problem with the WWE is it's very rare that they actually trust someone to do that on their TV.
I would say that they could, I'm sure people have suggested this before, but it seems like the proper place for a writing staff in the creative chain of wrestling is to I feel it seems like the performers should be in the room with the writers working this stuff out. Like it seems like having the writers sort of on their own generating this stuff without
a ton of that's unfortunately not the case. But go on, Evan.
A wrestler will be assigned a writer who may or may not take the wrestler's input. And whatever they come up with the wrestler then just gets sent up the chain. And God knows what happens to it once that happens.
It feels like what they should, like the role for writers here is to come in as punch-up guys. You know what I mean? Like have the wrestlers sort of establish the foundation, and then the writers come in with these characters created, with these sort of frameworks created, and then they find the good places to put in to like sharpen up some dialogue, to do some stuff like this. Like that's the role here. It doesn't seem like it should be coming from people who are not the wrestlers.
I think the other role they should have is to write stories. And that's something they really don't do. They come up with what the wrestlers are going to say and what's going to happen week to week. But because they're so beholden, and this is something that Doc's mentioned might actually get better without the crowd for whatever's lost, is that they're so beholden to the crowd reaction week to week and that kind of thing, that they don't really write long-term stories with twists and turns and interesting things happen. That happens rarely, but very rarely.
Yeah, it's super rare.
That's what the writers could do, is come up with situations, long-term narratives, and then the wrestlers can play their character within those situations and narratives.
Yeah, the long-term story between Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage that you could say, you know, to be generous, you could say it went from WrestleMania 4 all the way through to the Savage Warrior match at WrestleMania 7. Like, they just let those guys be their characters. They wrote a framework of story for it all. And the matches, you know, were good, were bad, whatever, but it worked. The people kept tuning in because they wanted to see these characters perform that story. They didn't want to see these guys perform, like, read lines that they weren't ready for.
And the story probably changed over those years to some degree in response to what was getting over or what wasn't. But I think they did have a long-term framework that they more or less stuck to. And it doesn't seem like they do that anymore. I think part of the problem is they had those long-term stories, but the crowd rejected them because it wasn't what they wanted. They had already planned for Roman Reigns to win the title 3 years out. Or like, you know, the whole Rock Cena story that took place over 3 years.
So much was sacrificed because that could have occurred and developed naturally, because no, it had to be Roman. So many people's like natural overness was sacrificed to his overlord Reigns, so to speak.
And I also think that the writing, these long-term narratives and stuff, are needed not as much for the biggest stars or the main events. They're needed for the wrestlers who aren't over yet. They're needed for the characters lower on the card who the money, the box offices don't depend on, but need to engage the viewer in some way. And that's what I think guys like Vince Russo, at least when he was doing really well on Raw and SmackDown, were really good at. Everyone on the show was doing something. That was something that Paul Heyman was always great at, creating some interest for a character no matter their weaknesses.
Yeah, and then you can plug that character into a bigger story, and the fans already know who they are. You know, to one of your points when you said that the best thing that the writers could do would be punch-up guys, is that people who have worked creatively directly with Vince McMahon say that the thing he's definitely the best at isn't coming up with a whole story. It's being given a story or a scene or a line, and then he makes it better. He changes it from something that's conceptually good to something that'll get over on television. And you know how much a small edit can change something like over that hump. And you know how rare it is that somebody will have that skill. The problem is when somebody who has that skill starts thinking they're the creative genius that has to come up with everything, and that everything has to be filtered through them, and then whatever they happen to say is right. You need a balance there, and there's just no balance. To bring all of this back to the Funhouse, the thing that is so deep that wrestling fans have been going on about the Funhouse is that it goes into the whole story arc of John Cena from when he showed up through to present day, and it inserts Bray Wyatt when appropriate and when he came in.
And for some reason, at some point, the NWO is involved.
Right, well, exactly.
There's a reason for that. So like they're telling the whole story of Cena's career. They're also telling the whole story of Wyatt's career and tying it all together in a way that's super coherent, that makes all these disparate matches and storylines over the years feel like a long-term interwoven narrative. And then they're tying that into really the whole history of the WWE, including Hulk Hogan and WCW and the NWO and all of that stuff. But I'll get into that in a minute. Doc, finish your point.
Well, the journey Cena goes on is the journey of like everything he had ever really failed at in the WWE, like his debut, where, you know, it was notable, but it didn't really take him anywhere. It's like how he never turned heel. So what if he, like, that's where the NWO thing kind of comes from, where he didn't finish Bray Wyatt 6 years ago. So Wyatt's come back for him. Stuff like that.
Yeah. So those kinds of things, like with the NWO thing, not only is it that he didn't turn heel, but the story of the match is Wyatt trying to convince Cena that he really is a heel. And my favorite part of the whole thing is when Cena is doing the Thuganomics thing and making these really mean jokes about like Wyatt's weight,
right,
and how he like failed about this and that. And Wyatt, they have the little cartoon voices going like, oh, and like Wyatt making a sad face, and it suddenly flips and Wyatt becomes the face, at least for that moment, or at least that's what Wyatt is trying to convey. And then when he's talking about the match 6 years ago at WrestleMania 30, he's like, Cena, you didn't listen to the crowd. They were behind me.
Which is
true.
They
wanted me, which was absolutely
100%.
true. Like, you were actually the bad guy in that match, Cena. You've actually been the bad guy this whole time. You're just like Hulk Hogan, who conned people into thinking he was a hero for years until he finally revealed himself. You, Cena, have just never actually revealed yourself. And he would have revealed himself if he had tried to kill Wyatt with that chair shot at WrestleMania 30. But he had to still play the hero, and he didn't finish Wyatt then. And one of the other just amazing details about this whole thing is in the video package beforehand, they have this clip of Cena in the empty arena, which, by the way, the empty arena works perfectly for this feud. It has just the right kind of weirdness to it. And so Cena says, this match will accomplish what the match 6 years ago should have, ending the existence of the most overhyped, overvalued, overprivileged WWE superstar. And at the time, you're like, oh yeah, he's talking about Wyatt. But then at the end, they replay that clip as the voiceover over Wyatt beating him, and you realize, oh no, wait, that's actually Cena, who's the most overhyped, overvalued. It's just fucking brilliant,
It's
man.
absolutely great. And Cena himself is like vaguely teasing, all right, that might just be it.
I mean, I assumed he was dead.
Yeah, along with AJ Styles and Luke Gallows. I also, and I know I kind of
mentioned... There was a high body count this WrestleMania.
It really was, yes. A body count of 2.
I know I mentioned this earlier, but at the end of the match, when finally, after mentally destroying John Cena through all of this, the Fiend finally shows up and has to clean out, has to take out the trash. He puts Cena, in the claw and takes him down, and that's all. And that's proper use of the Fiend. That's the evil part of Bray Wyatt.
Yes.
Whereas Bray wasn't evil the rest of that match. He had purged his demon, but he knows how to summon his demon when he needs to as well. And who better to take down John Cena than the purest of evil there? And we'll see what happens next.
A couple more details I got to talk about. So they do this Saturday night's main event flashback and they give this like 80s style promo in a cage, and it has the Southpaw Regional Wrestling filter over it. So it seems like an old 80s VHS, and it's just perfect. Like they totally embody that like 80s style of promo, hanging and banging and like doing the whole thing. And then they have and Cena's called Johnny Large Meat.
Johnny Large Meat.
And then they have the announcers Macho Mercy and Mr. McBossman. Mercy the Vulture being the Macho Mercy. And Evan, how much do you love fucking Devil Vince in this whole thing?
Oh my god, the whole when he was like talking to John Cena and like just giving him his little puppet punches, I was like, this is the best thing that I've seen so far in this part. I hope that Bray Wyatt is hugely over. I honestly think Bray Wyatt's he's gonna have an outside of wrestling career.
If he wants one, I bet you he could have one.
Here, yeah,
as a politician.
I could. Yeah, why not? Where's he from? I bet he could run it.
Where is he officially from? Where is he originally from?
Florida, I think.
I think he's from Florida. Yeah.
I think the Rotundas are from Florida.
Yeah, I think they're from Florida.
Which makes sense with the whole like he has that whole like swamp, like Everglades kind of backwoodsy vibe to him.
And I would imagine he can't. Florida must have had wrestling politicians in the past.
I'm sure they have. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'm sure they have.
In a lot of ways, Florida was the genesis of a lot of
It
wrestling.
really
Like,
is,
that's where
yes.
Dusty Rhodes came up. Like the main NWA stuff. Like the top NWA promotion was Mid-Atlantic, but all the really interesting ideas would generate in Florida, and then they would bring them to the Mid-Atlantic.
So do we have some final thoughts before we wrap
I
this
just
up?
really hope John Cena's okay. I mean, I've sent out several search dog parties, but they're having trouble seeing him, so they haven't been able to find him yet.
Oh, don't worry. The feds they have enough of a budget. You don't have to help them out. They'll
Right, he's
track
got
him
the
down.
Paw Patrol
think
on his side.
He's in the Paw Patrol.
Right,
yeah,
right.
they need to find him.
I think more so than him being like literally dead or retired or written out of the story, I think what the story is he's gone through a sort of character death. And what I'm hoping is just like everyone else who the Fiend has taken down, he will reemerge transformed. And I think now we might actually get the Cena heel turn.
We'll see. We'll see.
Or will we see?
That would
I
that
saw.
would be great if he comes out and he's either evil John Cena or like Sea Captain John Cena, like just something completely unrelated.
He's a pirate now. I think I saw one person observe that the only person the Fiend has fought so far that hasn't transformed has been Bill Goldberg. And the idea behind that is that Goldberg was just completely one-dimensional anyway. He already was completely true to himself, so Goldberg beat the Fiend. He didn't need to go through any transformations.
He doesn't have any depth to his psyche.
But as far as final thoughts go, I mean,
No subconscious to plumb.
Bill Goldberg just has yell and spear.
Hey, he has Jackhammer too.
right, that's the big finish. For final thoughts, they did Wrestlemania. You know, good for them, I guess. They're insisting on continuing to find out how to do live shows, which probably has more to do with their TV deal than anything else, but
Ah, yes. WWE and Fox, the forces of evil.
They should stop.
of course they should stop, but they're not going to until they're not going to. They just won't. Yeah, and that's pretty much it on my end. You guys have anything on final?
No.
Stay out of the ocean.
Continue to not go there. I hope that the WWE does more cool cinematic stuff
Agreed.
and less bad.
Right,
stuff.
they should just make movies for a while.
Yeah,
with the people who can do it.
Yeah.
Vince said in Beyond the Mat, we make movies. That's what he thinks of themselves anyway. Yeah, all right. So if you enjoy contesting wrestling and you would like to hear more contesting wrestling, we do have a Patreon at patreon.com/contesting wrestling. You know, for $1 a month, you get the episodes pretty much as soon as they're edited, whenever Evan, who edits all our episodes, and thank you so very, very much, is done. He'll put them up. And for $5 a
Of
month.
course.
Oh, yeah. And for $5 a month, you get a whole extra episode every single week. We put out bonus episodes, usually having something to do with that week's episode, but a lot more contesting wrestling goodness.
And for $50 a month, you get pictures exclusively of Ben's bowel movements.
Yeah, Ben, get on that, man.
All right. You know,
Yeah,
I had
man.
one. I was on tour with Scribes of Fire,
Wow.
and I ate a bunch of off-brand blue raspberry licorice.
Oh, no.
Like, not red ropes, but
Yeah.
red vines, but blue vines. And I took this shit in the bathroom. I mean, that's where I should have
You
taken
took this
which
shit
is
in
where
a
I
bucket
did.
in an alley.
And I looked at my poop and it was fucking neon green, like the fucking inanimate carbon rod in The Simpsons.
That's
you know?
fantastic.
And so I left the bathroom and I asked my bandmates, like, dudes, you gotta see this shit I just took. You
And
really
this has
do.
been contesting wrestling.
And they didn't want to see it. And I went in the bathroom and I videotaped it because we had a camcorder. And I showed them the video and I had already flushed by then. And you know what? They regretted not seeing it. It was that remarkably neon green.
That's incredible.
This has been contesting wrestling.
This has been contesting wrestling. It's going to be interesting to see if Ben messages me in the next 24 hours to ask me to take that out or not.
Leave it in.
I think it's
I'm
fine.
hungry.
No, it should be fine. And there's no, I also am hungry, and I'm I might have an experience like that. Sometimes I eat beets, and then I forget that I eat beets, and then I go to the bathroom, and I'm like, I'm gonna die. That's it. It's over. No more being alive, and then it turns out to be wrong. So we love you, listeners. Follow us on Twitter. Tell us your thoughts, your feelings, your hopes, your dreams, your goals. Please try to continue to be sane in the world. God knows this is going to come out a couple weeks from now, and who knows what'll be happening at that time. And just know
We
that
do.
we love you.
Bye.
This has been Contesting Wrestling.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.